not a very active choice. Okay, I will be very honest with you. It's not that, when I was growing up, I dreamt of being a scientist or doing a PhD. But I did realize when I was doing my master's degree in physics that I was better than my colleagues at experiments. Okay, that is something which, and an experiment is not, just you turn up and do something. About planning something, building some small instrument. In MSc you don't build much, but still, whatever you do, building an instrument, analyzing that data, figuring out what the problems could be, and most importantly, presenting that data. So that is something which I think it stuck with me. That look, this is something which I'm good at. I was not good at too many other things, but it's something which I felt that I'm good at, and maybe someday it will, it will come in useful. And that kind of was probably the only reason why I came into PhD. But then again, that was, I did not actively want to do a PhD. Somebody suggested to me, why don't you go and check out TIFR and, see. And when I came here, it was on one of those rainy days. And, I took the walk, which many of you have taken along the seashore, and, I sat in the canteen, and it felt like I was different from the people, this is something different, and I'm not so much of a common person. If I'm here, I'm, kind of reached somewhere, and that, I like that. And even then, many of you may, when they have come in, they may have decided that, I want to do a PhD in nuclear physics or biology, whatever. And I really did not have any such, specific plans or aspirations. I came in and I actually wanted to work in high energy physics. Okay, if you ask me now, I don't know why, but I wanted to work in high energy physics. But then, because of various issues, I did not get in there, and I was getting an offer from condensed matter physics, and I decided to join there. But I guess what I will say is that I've tried to make the best out of what I've got always. Okay, and to begin with, it may not look like the ideal way to go, and this is the when I came in, I never wanted to work in condensed matter physics. I knew very little about it, honestly. But one thing went from other to other, and then as you learn the tricks and the trades of the thing, you start liking it. So that's the best I can tell you. My group was me and my peer, okay, for 4 years. So there was nobody else in the lab. So, but outside the lab, we had a very large group, and we had friends with whom we would talk. There were other students in the department with whom, of course, in my department with whom I would discuss work. But now, being the only person in a lab for a large period of time, and that too in the basement, one corner of the basement, it does not sound, very exciting. But that I actually started liking that, because I learned to do things in my own way, and I learned to fix my own problem. Sometimes I could not fix the problem, but when I could, that gave me a special satisfaction. So if you ask me, how was the group dynamics, what advice did you get from your seniors, and how did you rag your juniors and all that, I really don't have much to say, because I did not work in a group. And that has kind of been true for most of my career. Even when I went to do my postdoc, so I did a short postdoc, as Ronnie told you here. I was working in the hut mint, and there was nobody around to tell me what to do, and I built what I had to build. The same thing when I went for my postdoc in USA, my boss, there was nothing, there were just a few tables in the lab, okay? And I was the only person. There was a graduate student who was not the most communicative person. So I basically started on my own and did things on my own. So, but in some ways, maybe in that respect, I was a loner, okay, in what I did. And that used to worry me, because I wondered, because when I had to start my own group, things would not go on. I was hoping somebody would join my lab. And I was quite worried at that time, whether what kind of interpersonal relations I might have with students, but whether that's good or bad that my students people who work with me can answer you better than me, but that was a concern. So I've never known during my PhD, but now I work with people, but now my equation with them is different. But during those times, as a student, I have never worked in a large group. But again, then as I said, I tried to make the best out of what I had. And I think that's important. I had lots of friends, and the fun activities would be, I don't know now if at 9:30 in the night the East Canteen opens. Does that happen nowadays? No. So it used to, 9:30 would be, at night would be the best time of the day. Okay, when we would be working throughout the day or whatever, not working, and 9:30 about 10 or 15 of us would religiously come to the East Canteen and for a cup of tea, or doesn't matter if there is tea or no tea, and 9:30 to 10:30 we would chat, and there were always the nocturnal people who would go back to work after that. I usually did not go back to work after that. So that, and in many other ways, there were some kind of social things that you would do in those days. I don't know how much you do that now. We used to be much more restricted in the places that we could go out on Sundays, for example. So nowadays you can just take a taxi and go wherever you want. So we couldn't do that in those days. Because none of us had our own vehicles and all that, and it was not, we didn't get paid enough to take a taxi in those days. I remember my PhD salary was like 2,000 or something like 2,000, 2,500. Anyway, so those are different days, but we would take the bus. So we had, along the bus route, you had this places where you could go, and even if you're going there with one or two people, you would always have somebody else from TIFR being there. So now I believe, because most of you have your own vehicles and other means of traveling, you are much more dispersed in what you do. But other than that, I was always very keen on doing things outside the lab. In fact, I made it a point to disappear around 6:30 from the lab. 6 to 8, I was not in the lab. I was rarely in the lab unless we were doing some experiments, and that is when I would go for some badminton, table tennis, whatever. And I made lots of friends there. Okay, and that I think has helped me in many ways, because even when I've gone to conferences outside India, like some Gordon conference and all that, I usually in such places you will have a place where you can play table tennis or badminton or something, and I made it a point to do that with people who, other attendees, and they are the people who remember me, not because of my science, but because of my table tennis. So I think doing something outside what you do in your lab, I think is really, really important. By doing things that satisfy you, I think to be motivated, it is very important to be proud of what you're doing. Okay, so I always, when you are in your initial years, when you are working with your PI, of course they will handhold you a little bit more, but there has to be a period of time. It depends on person to person, but I kind of think it happened to me within a year and a half or so, where I did not want my PI to tell me what to do. Okay, I really wanted to do it myself. Part of it might have been because I was alone in the lab. My PI can't be sitting next to me, and I had nobody to ask anything. So I started doing things on my own, and at some point of time, it becomes a little bit, I wish he didn't tell me, let me do it myself. So when you do things on your own, and it may not be 100% on your own, but you figure out little ways of doing things, I think then you start becoming proud of what you're doing. Okay? And that is what keeps you motivated. Look, I did it myself. Okay? Good or bad, whatever. A lot of things which I might have done initially may not have been very, take you anywhere, but still I did it myself. That was one. And the second thing was that when I was in my PhD days, starting from my second year, third year, I was doing quite a bit of instrument development. Okay? And that is something which I still, unfortunately, I don't do much of that nowadays, little bit here and there, but that was something, it used to keep me awake. How to make that little piece which will go and fit in here or there. So maybe it's in my genes because my father is sort of a machine design engineer. So I like doing that. So in short, doing things on your own and feeling that you've done something, that's what kept me motivated. Apart from the other things which are outside your PhD work, play, this, that. Yeah, so it was not smooth, and it was neither was it gradual. So it was over a period of something like 2.5 years before I really thought that I should stay in this field. Something biology related. But before that, I was not sure whether I want to continue doing this. But now, when I went, really the tough part was when I went out of here. Okay, and when I went and landed up in Irvine and started a new lab, and typically what may happen, many of you might have seen this, when you end up there and there is a new PI, if you go and work with a new PI, the person is really too busy trying to get money. Okay, and they have to write grants which may or may not get through, and all of us somehow think that the PI should be thoughtful of what I should kind of help me out, but you should also consider that there are times when you have to help your PI also. Okay, it works both ways. It's not just that your PI is there to help you out in everything and to babysit you. Babysit may be too strong a term, but kind of help you out, but it works both ways. And so if you do that, if you help your PI out in some ways, doing a small part of what he or she is writing, sometimes maybe emotionally also, it is not just good for your PI, it is good for you also, because someday you will be a PI. So to learn how to help somebody out is important. Now, I had to do a bit of that. So that part was rough. But then again, probably the most difficult thing, because I had come out of a very different, I had no idea of most biological terms and all that, is maybe I said this somewhere else, is to try and what is important to do. I can do something, yes, but will anybody care about it? That was most difficult for me to figure out, and I was not sure of that for a long time. I'm going to do something, and I know if I do it, I'm fairly sure I'll do it well. But even if I do it well, will somebody care about it? That I had no way of figuring out, because I just did not know what is important and what is not important. Just because I'm maybe using a laser light to catch something and measure some picometer, doesn't mean people will care about it, right? That initial hoo-ha dies out very quickly. So that, how do you make it sustainable over a career of 20-30 years was very difficult to figure out. That's the offer I got, and again, as I said, that I've not had too many choices, but whatever I've had, I tried to make the best out of it. So that was the offer I had that time. I had applied to other places. I did not get too many other opportunities, but this was a person who, so when my PI there, Stephen Gross, and he communicated a lot to me, because as I said, he was also looking for a person who he could talk to. Sitting alone in an office, writing a grant with nobody to talk to is not such a nice thing. So even though I was here at that time, TIFR, we would communicate over email. By the way, that was 3-4 years before. During my PhD, I remember, aside from what you're asking, you were the first time that email came to TIFR. Okay, there was a VAX machine, VAX. That was the first time we got email and we figured out how to send email and all that. So then I would communicate with him over email, and I would write 5 lines and he would write 50 lines. So so that's how it happened. I did not really make a very active choice. I didn't even know what motors and all are. But it seemed like this is a person who I can talk to, because I had no knowledge of biology at that time, and he was somebody who had learned biology, coming from a physics background himself, more physics than I was doing. Okay, he was studying all kinds of nonlinear dynamics and chaos and such stuff, but he came into this. So And he felt like a reasonably intelligent person to me. So I felt that, look, this must be important to do. Not yet. Short answer. What else can you do? You're running out of age. What else can you do? So my, whole process by which I got a job here was probably a little unusual, because I never really formally applied for a job here. I had come here in the summer, like you come back to visit home. I had come to TIFR, and so I was in probably the 4th year of my postdoc. I don't remember exactly, but I still had about 2 years more to go, and I gave you have the Wednesday colloquium here, right? So I gave a colloquium on some work that we had done recently, and then I gave a colloquium like a talk, and then there are people who ask me in the audience. It's not important to take names, but there are people who ask me whether you are interested in applying. And when I was told that, I felt, look, I must have done something which makes me attractive to this place. Otherwise, I was not even thinking that I would, anybody will consider me. I said, yes, I would certainly consider. That's an honor for me. And then we kept in touch. But basically, that's around the time when others asked me, are you interested in a job? Where I felt that, yeah, maybe I'm there. Now I feel like confident applying. So I had other job offers also, but I always thought that this is a place where there are people who wear different hats in the same building, and for the kind of things I want to do, like to do, this would be a better place to come. Right. So, kind of what I was trying to tell you earlier, that as a postdoc or as a student, you have usually a larger community of people with whom you can talk and with whom you can even talk nonsense. Okay, that is also important. But as you go slightly higher up, maybe become a postdoc or a faculty, etc., you will find that those kinds of discussions are maybe no longer possible with people. So then it is different. Okay, so trying to take your own decisions. Now, probably the biggest, particularly in experimental sciences, the biggest change is that when you realize at some point of time that you are not going to do things on your own, somebody else is going to do it, but you have to trust that somebody else, that they have done it right. Not just trust, examine the other person, and be sure that you're going to put your name on something and it was done right. So that is not easy to do, and it was certainly not easy to do for me, because I had almost no training in many of the things that happen in my lab. Even today, I will be very honest, students in my lab do various things, which many of those things I have never done myself. Okay, so I learn from them and they do it, but still at some ways I have to think of reasonably smart ways in which to assess, even if I can't do it, has it still been done right? So that is something which you will have to do when you make this transition to a faculty level, and to me that was quite difficult. It is still difficult, particularly when, let's say, a new person comes in. Now the lab is larger and there are other people who talk to the person, but when I really started my lab, it was very difficult because many of the experimental techniques I had never done myself. So to judge something that you have never done yourself is not easy. This is a difficult question for me to answer. I saw this in your list because your perspective as a student is very different from your perspective now. Okay, so if you ask me what has changed in the scientific culture, I really cannot, I don't have a very good answer for that. More so because I was in a very different department where I was in condensed matter physics, where the culture of doing science is very different. I'm not saying good or bad. It's different from the department where I am now. Okay, so this is somewhere a question to which I don't have. No. See, my my work, the kind of work I do has also changed somewhat. Okay, I cannot hope that not just hope, I don't even want, okay, to take a very physics-based approach and expect people who come with a very different training to, now, that being said, and maybe my people who work with me can also say that I do try to make things as quantitative as possible and try to do some kind of analysis which they might not do themselves and suggest to them, and then they'll go and do. But the kind of problems which I try to address have also gradually changed over the period of last maybe 10 years or so. Okay, and I don't see anything wrong in that. As long as I feel I'm doing something important and others feel so, it's worthwhile. But in the probably the way to do it right now is I talk to people. Like sometimes I collaborate with physicists and do things. But yes, indeed, in the beginning it was really difficult to, because the language which I spoke was very different from the language which people in my lab might have spoken at that time. But those students, my initial students, 3 or 4 students, also were reasonably successful, and I think somehow it worked. More than that, maybe people in my lab can add if they want to. No, I think there has to be a clear boundary that, between a PI and a student. I always feel that. Okay, and I feel that they should have their own space. Okay, so particularly, let us say, for example, I would not want to go for lunch every day with my students, because if there is some need, yes, if there's something, but I think they need their own time. They need to chat. They can complain about me, whatever else they want to do. They have that right to do that. Okay. So I don't think I maintain a strictly professional relationship with them. That doesn't happen unless you are I'm not that busy a person who would like to maintain a strictly professional relationship. There are many issues where they have, maybe some personal problem, something. I do talk to them and try to help out in the best way. So what I will tell you from my past roughly maybe 8-9 years of running my lab, I think I have an equal number of gents and males and females in the lab. Okay, and some are graduate students, some of it, but on a given day, so suppose there are 5 male and 5 female. On a given day, the probability that 1 or 2 of the males will be sick or will be absent is about 80%. The probability that all the females who are in the lab, let me use the term males and females, is maybe 4-5%. And I have not kept records, obviously, but the point I want to make, I'm not judging this. Okay, I'm just giving you data as I feel that I feel that in many cases, that's what I mean. I don't believe in this stereotype. I feel that given the data, and given what I have seen myself, I feel that at least the people who work in my lab, and this division between this different male and female, you should know where your priorities are. Okay. There are times when we were also students and we would not feel but we would come to work still. Priyanka and Kritika, there have been 2 people working with me who had children doing that. So, yeah, that's fine. So I don't remember the exact words, but basically what their citation says somewhere is that it is in recognition of the way that we have been able to marry advanced physical techniques to basic biological problems. Okay, and that has, and I think that's the most important, the right few things. But I think that is the most important thing, at least when I read it, is that how do you take real biological problems and interrogate them using techniques which people have never really done that. Okay, and again here the question comes back: how do you decide what is important? So I think it is. I think what the Infosys, I mean, if I look at it from my own perspective, what the Infosys prize, acknowledges is that I was able to recognize what is important, okay, and then do something about it. Just recognizing is not obviously enough. But then again, the work in my lab, which goes on now and over the last year, is, I think it is much beyond optical. So that was something which we started off initially, and I had some plans from it. So in fact, I will, in third year of my postdoc, 3 or 3.5 years, I was already developing a model system which I would work on in my own lab. Okay, so that I think is important, that when you are in the third, fourth year of your postdoc, hopefully earlier, that you start worrying about your next phase. So I was doing that. So, I mean, academically, there are really so many problems. It's hard for me to pinpoint one because it would be doing a disservice to the other problems. So, I work in a certain field. It's important to me, but may not be important to somebody else. Okay? And there are, as far as how to take the field forward, I mean, the people who are going to work are the most important. Okay, and then how to find people who can learn on their own. I think that is the main problem. Okay, because this is something where beyond a certain stage there are no existing curricula, there are no existing coursework. You're not going to learn all this in a coursework. Okay, so how to find people who can teach themselves? I think that is the biggest problem. One is where we kind of visualize this mechanism by which, so we look at these motor proteins which transport cargoes, where we thought that if each of those motor proteins has the ability to slow down when it is pulled backwards, which is like a gear sort of mechanism, how that ability to slow down would help them to work together. And that entire picture, it came to me when I was actually swimming one. Okay, so I was just thinking about it, and that this is the way it might work. I don't want to go into details right now. That how, if you have a number of things which are moving forward, and each of them can reduce its velocity if it is pulled backwards, how they will work better together in a team. That I think was one of the more exciting things. And then I thought more about it, and then I quickly came back and wrote it down because I have a tendency to forget. I think that was one. So there are two ways of doing it. You sit and complain, or you say, look, this is not going to change tomorrow, and let me do better than that. These are the two options. But I do think that at least this place gives you relatively a much faster time scale to things. So you can grieve, but then you will be grieving always. See, collaborations can be good, they can also be bad. Okay, I'm not necessarily saying that you need to collaborate for everything. The fantastic thing if people can do together, but there are many instances where you talk to people and you feel that this is kind of something forced. Okay, so there is a risk also that if too many people collaborate on a project, it kind of dilutes things out. So even if it works, it's fantastic, but I don't really see the necessity to collaborate for everything. Okay, that I will be very clear. Now, your question was that collaborations don't happen so often. They are not so effective. No, I don't think that is true. The people have, I know instances in our own department and in other departments here where people have done very nice things. But it's just that here, the number of people who you can pick from to collaborate is limited, and you have a much wider, variety of people to pick from if you are in a larger scientific community. I think it's relatively easy right now to get in there. So I don't think the kind of work which I started in my lab and went on to do would have been funded in the US. So, and the freedom with which I could do what I wanted to do, unlikely I would have done that in the US. I told you that research moment that I had was when I was swimming, right? So what better answer can I give you? I think it is very, I mean, a healthy mind lives in a healthy body. And I think it is therefore important to do other things. I don't think that people who are spending a lot of time in the lab are spending it productively. I don't think so. So might as well do something else.